From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis, where we kind of sit around and talk about the city that we love to sit around and talk about. You know, there is a stunning interactive map that's just been released by the New York Times this morning. You can download it from their site. You can zoom in on any part of the United States and you can see just how breathtakingly divided this country is. It's really hard not to conclude from this precinct by precinct depiction, every precinct in the country, that this really is Donald Trump's America. It's bright red from sea to shining sea, and then there's a few of those little infamous bubbles of blue that we affectionately like to call cities. And this got me thinking about how even in a city like Chicago, one of the 3 or 4 strongest holdouts for the Democratic Party, as blue as you can get on that little map, it's not as politically monolithic as you might expect. There really are differences of opinion on our city, and while they don't break down to Trump versus Obama so much, they do reflect a lot of the debates that are being hashed out all day long on cable news. For example, what kind of relationship do we want to have with our police? Or for that matter, how do they want to relate to the population that they serve? And as Chicago gets whiter and richer, how do we deal with the simple fact that housing is becoming more and more out of reach for anybody who can't cough up $1,000 or $2,000 a month for rent or even for mortgage? We like to joke about Chicago aldermen. You know, it's been a favorite sport in this town since probably municipal government was organized back there in the 1830s, was it? I don't remember. Anyway, but it's not easy being an alderman, especially if you care about these social issues. And that's because when you get down to it, we're just as divided as the country as a whole. Do we want to encourage gleaming, expensive, exclusive new neighborhoods like Lincoln Yards? Or do we want to make sure we hold on to whatever scraps of affordable housing we still have? Can we revitalize some of the grand old shopping districts we older folk remember from our youth? Or do we just surrender all of commerce to Jeff Bezos? Well, John Arena has been on my list for a long time as somebody I'd like to welcome to this show for that kind of big picture discussion because he cares about the future of our city. He's alderman of the 45th Ward up on the northwest side, and he's been unusually vocal about all of these issues. He's also attracted legions of fans and legions of political opponents, and I'm happy to say that gives us a good reason to have him here at the table today. Alderman Arena, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome from the 45th Ward to our new studios here. Let's start with the news, shall we? Because after City Council yesterday, or at City Council yesterday, there was some discussion about this march onto Lakeshore Drive and ultimately to Cubs Park and all that. And Mayor Emanuel said that he would not endorse it, that he would not go along with it, which puts him kind of at odds when he was very much in favor of and endorsed Father Pfleger's march on the Dan Ryan Expressway. Put that in some perspective for us. Are these two the same thing?
Well, I think initially he wasn't for the march on the Dan Ryan either. I think as it became evident that it was going to happen, and for public safety reasons, they had to find a way to make sure that it could happen safely and everybody was going to come out of that okay. And to the credit, it went off as a successful protest. There were no injuries. It was something that created, again, more space for a conversation to the extent that, as you pointed out earlier, that Superintendent Johnson was there during the march. And I think, you know, incremental steps are okay. We need to make sure that there's a dialogue going, and if it takes that kind of overt action by a community that feels like their issues aren't being addressed, that the issues of police engagement are not being addressed at a fundamental level, and the issues of violence in their community is not being addressed, that they have to take those actions. I think we as a city have to respect that, whether we live in the neighborhoods that are experience this kind of violence, or neighborhoods like mine, which violence is very low and crime is very low. I think it's difficult in communities like mine to kind of understand that perspective, that you would have to take that level of action to feel like to feel like that's what you need to do to be heard.
So then I assume you're kind of sympathetic with the organizers of the march who are saying that we have to actually kind of distribute the discomfort in a way. We have to take our issues to the parts of the city that don't have to really consider these issues very often.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the level, we see the numbers, right? We see the number of shootings within the community and also between the police and the community. And every time one of these happens, it raises the question of what are we doing to create a relationship between the police and the community they're supposed to serve versus it being an occupation of communities they're supposed to serve. And that's what we have to be cognizant of, and we all have to participate in the solution at some level.
While we're speaking about police, the big thing that seems to be in the news right now is this consent decree with Lisa Madigan and the mayor and presumably the police. What we're being told is that it's almost all done except for one thing, which is this notion about whether the police should be required to log every time they, I guess the phrase is point a gun at someone, and the police are opposing this. First of all, are you surprised that that this consent decree agreement seemed to have happened so quickly and with such great concert? And then, of course, the issue about the guns. But it kind of flew under the radar for a couple of months. We've been talking about it incessantly on the show here, and then suddenly it's like, oh, the consent decree, it's almost done.
Yeah. Well, I think my perspective is that this isn't just now. This is a consent decree that should have been created 2 years ago. And I think we are long in the tooth in terms of getting to a point where we're negotiating the final points of it. And I think, referencing back to the beginning of this conversation, that's one of the reasons why these communities are concerned, where the mayor came out after the revelation of the Quan McDonald video and said, we're going to reform the police department, we're going to attack the culture of silence, we're going to go after these things, and we're going to get a consent decree. And then he backed off of that, and it was Lisa Madigan that pushed him back forward into that
sued him,
table.
I believe, right?
Exactly, sued the city. So, these are the kind of signals that, why you see marches on the Dan Ryan and proposing marches on Lakeshore Drive is because of those kinds of actions of government. When we say we're going to tackle a problem head on, and then say, okay, well, now the camera lights have turned off, we're going to start backing away slowly. This is the kind of thing that undermines confidence that we are taking action to address these critical concerns. So, if we get to a point, whether it's, whether that level of detail in terms of whether an officer pulls his gun and how that's logged, I mean, on one hand, can't say that I'm a criminologist or understand, but I do know that if an officer is pulling his weapon, that should be the very last measure that is taken, that he is forced into that position. And if they're pulling their weapon, and that's the case, then logging the reasons for that, whether he fires or not, should be documented, especially at a time when what we see is they're pulling their weapon and they're firing their weapon. So is that a completely unreasonable request in the context of what we're dealing with right now? In the context of just a police department that's engaged and there's conversation with the community, I would say, yes, that's unreasonable. That's not where we are as a city right now.
I was surprised to see, actually, I hadn't given this much thought before the last few days, that cities like Baltimore and New Orleans already have this in place, and apparently several other major cities do.
So we're not treading over ground that hasn't been tread before. There's other cities that have been through these consent decrees and have come out and are working with these kind of new kind of tools to, again, these are long-term initiatives. None of the stuff that we do is going to produce results tomorrow or in a week or a year. It's multiple years that these cities have been out of these consent decrees and have been using these types of tools.
Like body cams and everything else. It's going to take a long time before we really get a handle on what value it has, but at least so far, it certainly opened up the conversation. It's certainly done that.
But we have to talk. We have to. This is part of when we say the culture of silence, and some of the hardened folks on the police side that say let them do their jobs. Well, I'm sorry, their job is not to create a body count, and I don't think that's what they want to do. They want to be safe and go home at the end of the day. We all have to reset the gauges and create a structure that there's accountability. And if we're not talking about it, then we're part of the culture of silence.
I think it's going to be really interesting if this does in fact get into the consent decree and it becomes, would you call it the law or the rules, whatever it is, it becomes codified. It's going to be really interesting to see how many officers and I would expect it's the majority, almost never point their gun at anyone. I mean, they probably go much of their career without doing it. And then there are going to be others, I can't guess at what frequency, but maybe they're doing it once a week, who knows? And that is going to be a conversation that the police department and the community are really going to want to have.
Yeah. And that kind of data that you just illuminated is really important for both sides of the conversation. We tend to hear about this stuff as, well, this puts the police in a bad position and they have to justify what they've done. It also illuminates that there are a lot of great officers that are engaging their communities. They're talking to people. They're de-escalating situations. They're doing that over and over again, and that's not what gets on the primetime news. What gets on the news is when shots fired, one way or the other. And this is the kind of thing that I think can actually benefit both sides to really understand, so that the folks that are anti-police and saying the police are the problem can be pointed to some data that says, look, not all. And let's make sure that we're talking about the subset of any population that causes problem in our society. In black and brown communities or whatever community, it's a small subset that are executing crimes or using weapons. Same thing with the police. And we have to be fair about how we analyze.
The releases of these videos have made me something of a little bit of a police video junkie. I've just been absolutely enthralled isn't the right word. Pinned to my seat would be more like it. When you watch like a police chase, or you watch just the situation of pulling up into God knows what you're going into, and just imagining, could I do that? Could I be in that situation? And the answer in almost every case is no, I couldn't. So yeah, it definitely is a two-way street. I think that we've already gotten a different appreciation for what day-to-day life is like for a Chicago police officer, but we also see the other side of it. Do you have any thoughts about this Augustus video thing, the silent video that was edited and released by the police? I'll just say, to throw it out there, that my reaction to it has been, and I've said it on the show, that the police department did more damage to themselves than they did good by releasing something that was clearly and obviously edited. And with no sound.
Yes, I think if we're going to take a policy that we're going to release videos, then release it all, because context matters, and people on both sides will say that, right? You don't, if somebody says, why did you shoot that person? He wasn't armed. What did you see? Seeing it from different angles, seeing what the dialogue that led up to it, what was said, what threats were made or not made, all of that stuff's important. What this video did was take this out of context. So you only see the officers coming up to what I saw was somebody standing there in a dialogue with an officer. And then to manipulate the video to illuminate, well, look, there's a gun there. At the end of the day, we have a concealed carry law here. We have a Second Amendment law that's supposed to apply to everybody. What that's trying to say is a black man with a gun is an imminent threat. And that is not what the Second Amendment illuminates.
And exhibiting behavior of someone who was armed. Well, what does that mean? I mean, the Supreme Court has made it pretty clear that you can be armed. So what behavior is it that you exhibit if you're armed? It's weird.
And this, I think, again, what's interesting about the fact that they zoomed in on the fact that he had a gun, as if that was the only thing that mattered, again, projects to me a level of bias saying, a black man with a gun is an imminent threat, and he was not. What's interesting of what they zoomed in on is that gun in a holster, holstered at his belt. It was only illuminated because he was being thrown, onto a car, and his shirt came up. The only time he made a move towards that weapon was when he was being shot in the back. So I think there's a lot that is illuminated there, and in a lot of ways, we need to see the rest of that so we can say, well, why was that man a threat in that moment? And maybe what happens before can illuminate that, but showing that video showed bias on the part of the police department, or an attempt at showing bias, and didn't illuminate the situation, at least to my understanding, to the benefit of the police.
It's a very complicated situation, and it's kind of the foundation for what I hope is our whole conversation here today, because it has to do with how the government and the people it governs relate to each other and trust one another. And this, to me, was just a fantastic example of that. Gary McCarthy was sitting in that chair on our show last week, and we were talking about it. It had just happened, and we were talking about it, and it was so interesting to see the two different perspectives that we both had from watching the same video. He said he went for his gun. I said it looked to me like he was, like his belt was slipping, and he went to maybe grab it or something like that. I didn't see him actually going for his gun. Neither of us knows. We're both looking at this grainy little piece of video, and we're looking at it from our own life experiences and our own biases and prejudices. That's why there's at least 3 officers, maybe 4 at the scene. They all theoretically should have been wearing their body or had their cameras on. We could probably see this from several different perspectives with audio. Somebody has it, right?
Yeah. So full context is what, and that's why, you know, when we do this, it's either allow COPA to do its job, evaluate all of the evidence, and or if you want it to be the court of public opinion, then give the court all of the evidence as well. And that's not what happened in this case.
One other very quick thing on this, you know, FOP, the police union, has taken a really strong position on this and similar things, and they issued to the Lisa Madigan thing, the statement about wanting to have the record of gun pointings at people. They said political careers in Chicago are built by attacking the police. So, you know,
I don't know if I agree with that. I think they're built by leaving the police to their ends. I mean, I think the conversation that I have with my colleagues about, well, you don't go after the police. We you know, blanket support for the police from the political class has been the norm. So I completely disagree with that statement.
Yeah. Let's move on to this incredible revelation in the Tribune the other day that TIF collections are now topping $660 million, fully a third of the money that we send to the city in our city property taxes is, well, you have to be very careful about how you word this, but is going into other funds, is going into the
various TIF funds, and not all of the TIF funds, because
right.
There's I don't know if it's 1/3 of the total land area of Chicago is under a TIF. Some of these TIFs generate 0 increment. And the ones that are generating the lion's share are the ones that are downtown. I think one of them alone is generating $140 million on its own. And so what that shows is the disparity in terms of where the economy is improving, where the values of property is increasing versus not increasing or staying stable or dropping. And I think that right there is what we need to look at most importantly, because the policies that we are enacting, the way we're investing in our city is ignoring a great opportunity for us to increase the revenue that the city generates and decrease the revenue that we take from communities where property values are spiking. So, the 45th Ward has been pretty steadily increasing. I've heard between 12 and 17% increase in property values over the last 10 years. What we need is a couple of percentage points of net increment in areas that are stagnant. And that's not going to change unless we build infrastructure there, unless we invest in there, and make sure that we're giving opportunities to the communities that have high unemployment and low opportunity.
Right. And as you say, the communities where, at least in theory, this whole concept was born for, to stimulate growth in communities where there is no growth, the way you get the money is by taxing the increment, but the increment doesn't happen in the communities where you want the money. So then you get into this whole thing of porting money from one thing to another.
Or surplusing.
Which
is a tool that the Progressive Caucus is every budget we have been pushing for an increase in the amount that is surplus, which is right now set at 25% of unallocated funds in TIFs like the couple that I have in the 45th. But that's how you free that money from the constraints of the boundaries of the TIF and be able to take that through policy and say, we need to invest in infrastructure, roads, lights, the things that allow businesses to function, and then also incentivize business activity, giving opportunity and training to neighborhoods that desperately need it. When I talk to my residents, I was like, if we want to reduce the tax burden on you, John Q. homeowner, increase the property value by 1 or 2% in areas of need that are on the south and west side.
Interesting.
Because the levy has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And if there's nothing coming from here,
Yeah.
we have to ask for more from over here.
Right.
If we increase this here, it reduces the burden on these
So you have
homes.
to invest in that.
You have to invest in that. Our investment of our tax dollars from this part of the city going here saves us money in the long run.
So you're not anti-TIF. It sounds like what you're saying is that there has to be an intelligent way of moving these funds around to make them more productive.
Yeah, I'm pro use the tool the right way. It is a tool with limited abilities it can do great things in a particular place. My TIFs, I have the Jeff Park TIF and the Portage TIF, which are about to sunset in 2021. Most of that investment has been in schools, streets, parks, things like that. Those kind of investments in neighborhoods are great because it's really hard to claw that money back from the individual sister agencies.
Yeah.
A lot of politics involved in that, but if the money's pooled there and I can build a park or I can put a new roof on Schurz, if I can put a new soccer field on Schurz High School and create a better opportunity and people seeing that school as an opportunity for their kids, that increases home values. So that's how you can cycle that money and invest here locally and get a benefit at the home that's across the street. If I have a zero incrementing TIF on the south or west side, I can't put money into my schools. I can't build streets. I can't build roads.
Because your TIFs aren't generating any money.
If you're taking that same money and I'm choosing to give it to a developer that has shown me numbers that show a gap in his financing, and we haven't vetted those numbers that proves there is actually a gap, which happens too much, that's the kind of thing we need to do and say, use the tool, but vet the numbers. Don't take the developers at his word. Check it. Make sure that what he's saying is right. When I've done that for the TIF asks that have happened, more often than not, it's come back saying, yeah, your numbers are a little bit to your favor.
Yeah.
If we balance this out, you don't need the TIF or you need much less. And in a neighborhood like mine where I'm gaining businesses and I'm seeing increase in property values, I don't need to incentivize a business to come. I'll do that by just doing the hard work of picking up the phone, walking them around the neighborhood, talking about what's great about the neighborhood. That's the way you can, that's a different tool. That's just the communication tool.
We are so far in the weeds here, but what about a kind of a third category, which is using TIF money for things that are generally speaking good for the whole city? I'm thinking Rahm Emanuel loves to spend TIF money on CTA stations, like for example, building Cermak, or now they're going to build Damon. You approve of that? You would vote for that?
Because those are public benefit investments.
As opposed to soccer arena or whatever kind of arena it is, or the McCormick Place,
this Live Nation, that's a whole different animal. You don't need to incentivize somebody to come and invest in Lincoln Park.
Right.
I mean, that is the most insane use of TIF, and that's the kind of thing that I would be opposed to. And I also know that just putting a TIF in a neighborhood where, like I said, where you have zero increment, you're not taking money that is at discretion of the administration to invest and doing that aggressively, then the TIF is a useless tool. It's a hammer that can't be used to build.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do in terms of policy around the TIF structure.
We're jumping all over the place, but these are just things that spring up in the news. So yesterday, you all were asked to vote $8.5 million in settlements, of which 4.5 was for police misconduct, for things that the police have done that the city just has had to settle for. And that's just 4.5 million out of, what is it, getting to be close to $500 million now.
Yeah, those are troubling settlements, and we sit through briefings prior to these votes in the Finance Committee and in the full council to understand what is the underlying issue, what was the incident that happened, and what is the evidence that we have, what kind of testimony would be offered on either side. We do get those briefings from the law department, and that kind of depth is important for us to understand, well, if we have higher exposure than even those large numbers, if we go to trial, we are, in some cases, we're being prudent with taxpayer dollars by settling these cases before they go to trial, because we're probably going to lose, and the settlement will be bigger if it's up to a jury. So we have to measure that. And some of these things go back. I know when the Quan McDonald video came out and we reformed COPA, COPA started opening up cases that IPRA had done and closed years ago, 10 years back. And those were opened up, and some of those things had been languishing for a decade. We needed to settle those cases. We needed to clear the books of those cases, one way or the other, take them to trial or settle them. So some of this money is money that was due in arrears, and we're now just catching up with that. We have to find a way, and again, this goes back to the police accountability, that we have good, well-trained police, enough police to do the job, and we start reducing the number of settlements that we have to entertain because we've done the hard work of creating a partnership in the community.
Where are you on No Cop Academy? That's been a big discussion point around here. There seems to be full agreement that the police are not as well trained as they should be, but do we need a giant academy to accomplish that?
Yeah. There's a lot of caveats around whether we need a new building. I've been in the current training facility. It is not efficient for a city this large, for a police force this large. It's just not enough space. It doesn't have the right venues to do the things we need to do to train in modern policing terminology. So the challenge is, we say we need to train this force, retrain the old force, if you will, and train hundreds of recruits that are coming through the system for us to get to the force we need. That's a difficult thing to do in the facility we have. Is this exactly the right time and place to be focusing on a building? That's a difficult conversation. I would be supportive. I've offered support for the 2 votes we've had to take that are related to the money.
You did vote in
I did
favor.
vote
Yeah.
for the $10 million in TIF to acquire the land, and the $20 million for them to do the planning of what the facility would be like. And what I said in my statements on council floor about that was, it matters how the building is going to present itself to the community.
Yeah.
Is this going to be a fortress where recruits go in and then come marching out and nobody can see through the veil? No, I will vote against that. What I have suggested and what I would vote for is a facility that allows for officers to have the facilities they need to be trained well on modern policing technologies. But as part of that training, it has to be training and community engagement. The only way you can do that is if there is a porous nature to this building.
Right. If you're going to train, you should be training community engagement.
If we need to call this thing is a police, fire, and community policing training facility. We need to be bringing the communities into this facility and engaging and get understanding.
Yeah.
So much of us don't understand what the police are trained in, and we don't know how our community policing is just a thin veil right now. We don't know what it is. We don't know how to engage with each other. If that facility has that kind of presence to it, where it is an opening and welcoming the community, I can support it. We've talked about TIFs. What's important to the folks who say you could take that money and do something else with it, yeah, you can. It's not the only money we have. We need to invest in our schools. We need to invest. There's other tax levies to do that. Those budgets are important to watch. Just because we're spending X amount of dollars in one place doesn't mean we can't spend other money in other places. But it's how we spend the money around this critical issue, because it ties into everything that's going on in the city right now about trust in government, trust in our public servants, police, fire, and how we see each other.
There's been a debate that's been going on for as long as I can remember of this kind of what I would call sort of rivalry between the police and fire department. I mean, it goes back to I think you were around when the 911 center was built, right?
Yeah. Just being built.
Yeah, I was working for the city at that time, and I think that a huge part of the reason why that giant structure was built, in my humble opinion, this is just my opinion, was because they were trying to figure out a way to force the police and fire department to at least have a mutual dispatch system. I mean, it's hard to remember. When I was a kid, it was PO 51313 and FI 51313. I mean, you had to decide whether you were going to call the fire department or the police department. And the idea that these are our first responders and they just have different functions is something that's very, very hard to impose on a fire department and a police department. I know that happens in other cities too, but I think we still see reflections of that today. In the Greer case, the police are blaming the dispatchers and saying I've seen accounts of it saying, well, if they were police dispatchers, they wouldn't have sent, they would have sent different people out there. Well, they are police dispatchers. They're
cross-trained.
They're cross-trained. So there are just some of these things that just don't ever seem to go away.
Yeah. Well, I think, look, going back a generation or two, the issue of mental illness was, we weren't dealing with that the way we deal with it. We weren't dealing with substance abuse and the conditions that are leading to the situation.
Yeah.
So we have to address that. And I think by, having this kind of common understanding across the two different disciplines, I think that's important, and we have to evolve. And there's a lot of people say, "Well, I remember when we used to do it like." Yeah, but all of the things that were ignored because produced the way you used to do it. Here we are today. Here are the things we recognize, that the advances we've made in understanding people, the mind, and how people are responding to stress. We have to acknowledge that, and so you then have to change some of your policies and structures to accommodate that.
I know how emotional the No Cop Academy issue becomes, and it's become highly politicized. But the one thing that I think I've said pretty consistently is, until you have the police and the fire cadets, at least, training side by side, you're not working in a real world situation, because at a disaster scene, they're all first responders, right? Yeah. They're all on the same team.
There was a garage fire 2 doors down from my house a couple of weeks ago, and police and fire are both there. So, for a minor incident like that, as stressful as that could be, you definitely need that kind of crossover.
Want to talk politics?
Love to.
I mean, you're with the Progressive Caucus. So, I just can't wait to ask you about this. You and I both appear on the Ben Joravsky show from time to time, and I said yes a week ago or so. I was on his show and said, I actually believe there's an argument that could be made that Rahm Emanuel is not going to even get into a runoff. I think he's going to just get it. Well, I don't say I think he will, but I think there's an argument that he might just take it without even having an opponent.
Oh, okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. He's going to. The money will drive a lot of the reason why that's a possibility, and the money that the credible challengers could or could not raise. So yeah, there is a possibility of that. Again, we have a very divided city. Some people are like, well, I don't like everything about him, but he's the guy we got. And some people are like, no way, never. But even if you're no way, never, your choices are, and you either have a candidate that you would vote for, or you don't have a candidate to vote for, and then you're not participating, you're staying home. Yeah. And that's the part that scares the heck out of me, right? Because we want to make sure, we want to make sure that we have a robust dialogue around elections. It's good that there's multiple candidates in there, that somebody's challenging him. When we get to the place where you don't, I think what we saw over the years with Daley was you didn't have a robust lineup of credible challengers, and so turnout's down, he gets reelected, and then why change the direction which you're doing? No,
that's something that really has changed.
Yeah.
I mean, the common sense was that Daley chose the people who were running against him for the most part. But I don't think Rahm Emanuel is choosing all of these people who are running against him. Maybe some of them, but not all of them. So, got a favorite so far?
I don't. I mean, I'm as an individual citizen, I will go and vote, and I will vote for mayor. But I have a role that's unique because I'm a legislator, and I truly believe that for the council to play its role well, we need to be independent of the mayor, regardless, even if it is a truly progressive mayor that I love. I need to look at what's put in front of me from whoever is in that office, and I need to look at it critically and make sure that it's doing the best that it can do with taxpayer dollars or achieving the best aims. If we have a city council that is less run by a mayor's floor leader, I think we should have a council floor leader. Even when we talk about our committees, the chairmen say, your committee, speaking to the president, who is the mayor of the council at that moment, saying your committee on. It is not his committee, to be perfectly honest in the nomenclature.
Oh, come on, be
it is-
realistic now.
Well, I mean, in terms of the structure that we have in this city, it should be.
That weak mayor
It is
thing.
the council committee on.
Yeah.
You are putting proposals, we are evaluating them,
Right.
and then we are sending back an approval or denial. I think we can have a better city council if that was what was the sentiment of the council members and of the chairs of those committees. How we get there, is work that we have to do within the council and less of what we have to do with the mayor. So you asked me who I'd vote for. I say I will vote for a candidate mayor. I probably won't be endorsing a candidate because I think that would be prejudicial on my part.
I get that. I totally get that. The Chicago, what is this one called? This is a Chicago Victory PAC, which has just been set up. Its announced purpose is not only to reelect the mayor, but to strengthen the city council majority, quote unquote. They want to get it from 48 to 50, or I mean,
I guess that it's that last number of votes against that he wants to get to zero.
the mayor wakes up in the morning and says, "My biggest problem is I don't have a majority in the council."
Well, he has a super majority in the council right now, so I'm not sure what he's worried about. I think what he's worried about is the sentiment in the population that they don't want council members that are bound to the mayor in lockstep, that they want to see their representative, their local representative, exert effort in reviewing the legislation that's put before him, come forward with ideas and be active. I think that's what he's most afraid of, that's the movement that we see. We see a lot of progressive candidates coming forward, running across the city, and I think he sees the possibility that, with the Progressive Caucus in the 2015 cycle going from 8 to 11 members, if that trend continues and we get to the high teens, getting to 26 votes on progressive legislation is in our sights. We're doing it now, and he's worried that that's going to become more and more a commonality in the council.
Interesting. I mean, at first blush, the whole thing is laughable. But when you put it that way, you can see that there really is a concern. So maybe what it is they want to try to cut the feet out from underneath progressive challengers to their favorite alder
He's going to want to
people.
shore up the people that are solidly in his corner, and he's going to want to make sure that he finds, if there's open seats like in 47 where Amaya Poir is stepping away, that he gets somebody in there that's going to be with him more than not. I think that's going to be a challenge in a pretty progressive ward.
Has Rahm Emanuel been a bad mayor?
Bad is a very black and white term. His set of policies and directions have not been what I would agree is the direction that the city needs to go. It's been doubling down on investments in areas that are already seeing investment. And the big shiny projects are great for us on the world stage. They're important to do. But if we're doing those at the expense of the things that are just the routine things, the paving of the streets in neighborhoods that are decimated, not building up that infrastructure so that businesses can thrive, that's where him and I diverge. So I respect that, when he brings a headquarters in, it can't be just the count of cranes in downtown Chicago. It can't be just the count of corporate jobs. Those jobs are living in the suburbs. The jobs we need are for black and brown communities that have 40% unemployment. You start creating that opportunity, you start addressing the crimes issue that we have, the murder rates, the interactions between police. Places where people see no hope and feel that nobody is there for them is where you see crime, is where you see desperation. And if we're not addressing that, it's denying our humanity, that we are not looking at a way where we can help and we're not helping.
But this really gets right to the heart and the soul of my despair at this point, because I understand everything you're saying, but what jobs are these exactly? What jobs are these for less trained, less experienced, mostly minorities, but not necessarily minorities? My local McDonald's, I just went there yesterday, and they had been closed. They had their indoor part closed for about a week, and they reopened it. It's kiosks. Kiosks have come to within 3 blocks of my house. And the loads of people who were working there it seems to me like they were cut by a third at least. I mean, there's nobody at the counter. There's one person at the counter. I'm not picking on McDonald's. This is the world we live in. Everything's getting automated. Everything's getting computerized, and we actually, we kind of prefer going up to the touch screen and being done with it.
We do it on our phones all the time.
We do it all the time.
Automation creates efficiency, and it reduces a number of jobs in this location, but can increase them in other places. Look, if they can process more orders more efficiently, and it's creating more people that they need on the in the back of house as opposed to that front of house, then that might be where some of the waterline is. But you can't look at a McDonald's and say, well, all businesses are someone to go to that. The local, yogurt shop in my neighborhood is always going to have a teenager working behind the counter. She's not going to automate that. At some point, yeah, that's great when the item we're buying is literally designed to be efficient. A McDonald's burger is go in, push the button, it pops out of the slot, you go on. That's the mode you're in as a consumer. But there's also burger places where you go in that are Kuma's Corners or Burger Belly, which is in my neighborhood, and that's an experience.
Yeah,
that's an $8 burger that's just I want to take an hour to eat this thing because it's so good. Right? Different modes and different things. Same product at the end of at the beginning of the description, but the experience is what we're looking for. So what we need to do in neighborhoods is where the entrepreneurs are that want to be able to open up a small restaurant or open up a small shop and sell their wares, and there's nothing around them that supports that structure. He can't create an opportunity for a teenager to get a job and to get training and to get in the system. They're low-income neighborhoods and they're low-skilled neighborhoods because we haven't invested in the fundamental education.
Totally agree.
From societal to work to broader education. We've divested.
To racist policies like redlining and everything else.
And closing of schools, and then you take a school out of a neighborhood. Where is the nucleus that you rebuild the neighborhood?
But do you see the frustration that I'm feeling though? That I mean, just in my little short lifespan, I've seen a situation where, regardless of the economy going up and down and anything, there was always a job. My dad had like 15 of them, I know. I mean, just moving from one factory to another, right? That's gone. That's just completely gone. And when I hear politicians say, well, we have to invest in training, it's like, well, training for what? I get this sense that a lot of people are shuffled into these rooms where they sit in these mindless things for an hour and people talk to them about wearing a tie for your job interview or some crap like that, but they walk back out the door and it's like there is no job for you.
Yeah, I think one, manufacturing has shifted like so many things in terms of what is our understanding. The old production line is gone, but I can point to businesses that are in my ward, my little corner of the city, where I have a few industrial corridors. Apollo Plastics is on Elston Avenue. They recently expanded, added 10 jobs under the portion of the 6,000 square feet they expanded into. This is high-tech plastic injection molding. Probably the car you drive has a piece that was produced there. 9 different nameplates produce their knobs and dials there. Orion Industries does specialty coatings. They've just expanded to 120 jobs, moved into a bigger building on Northwest Highway. What's happening is it's different manufacturing. And these are some low-skilled, but in some cases, but also high-skilled, manufacturing techniques. And it's happening on the Northwest side. But you hear, well, everything's going to China. What a lot of these companies found is, there's a cost to sending to China. If the product comes back on the slow boat and it's not right, now I've lost the production cycle. We're in a moment where the production cycle is so tailored, it has to be there on time and be right. Miniaturization has happened in the production machinery, so that's why Apollo Plastics can put a piece of machinery that's as big as this table that 10 years ago was 5 times the size. It cost 10 times the money. This machine can do more, it can do it faster than what was doing it, and it takes 1 man to do it versus 5 or 10. So there's differences in this. We have to acknowledge that urban farming is coming our way. We have to acknowledge that technology and how do we create food efficiently locally. It's not about getting the drill press back. It's getting
Right.
the 3D printing technology into our schools so that kids know that that's how we're going to be producing a lot of the components that are being shipped from China.
But just yesterday or the day before, we heard this thing about, just out of the blue, all of a sudden Facebook announces that they're going to bring hundreds of jobs to Franklin. They're taking half of a high-rise. And this was, I don't know, maybe the city was working on this for months and trying to convince them, but it's so interesting to compare it to the Amazon situation. As far as I know, there was no TIF money involved or any incentives. They just said, yeah, Chicago's a good place. We're going to expand there. But yet, for only a slightly larger number of jobs, we're willing to spend $2.5 billion to bring Amazon here. I just don't get that.
Well, I completely disagree with the Amazon.
Okay.
My God.
Good.
I mean,
but
giving away that much money to a company that's the richest company in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But just to put it in context, in both cases, we're chasing after these jobs for people who are going. The people who are going to get these jobs are highly educated people with a fair amount of experience. They are not the people we're talking about in our city who desperately need jobs.
Yeah.
So great.
But
I'm glad these people are
yeah.
going to get jobs. But what about the people we
The
really
question
care
is
about?
what is the talent set that you need to work at in the back end of an Amazon? Because Amazon is a technology company. It's a mail order company on the front end, which just beat the hell out of Sears, right? The last Sears closed in my ward.
In your ward.
So, which was a mail order company. So the irony is, they say you got beat out by your own design.
There's something so richly ironic about the whole Sears story.
Yeah.
That's another hour.
But the back end of Amazon is technology and it's logistics. So it's a
website with trucks.
Exactly. So our community colleges have a very robust logistics program at Olive Harvey. That's a 2-year program that if you've got a B average in a CPS school, you get for free, and you could work for Amazon or any other company that's doing that. The kids that are using their phones and are learning technology in the classrooms now, our high schools are doing good work.
Yeah.
We still are lagging behind knowing what's going on in the building versus thinking we know what's going on in the building.
Yeah.
You need to go into Schurz High School, you need to go into Steinmetz, you need to go into Taft, you need to go into these schools and know that there is a grow lab in Schurz that is producing enough greens to not only serve the cafeteria for the school, but there is a grow lab, a food science lab that's got a uplink to MIT, so that they are learning about the grow technology of the future at Schurz High School on the northwest side, and they're serving those greens in their cafeteria at the local food pantry. And we now have a partnership with O'Hare, with Host at O'Hare, where we have those kids going in and advising the Grow Lab at O'Hare on how to run their facility more efficiently. This is the headline that we need to tell about our students now. So when you say, who are those jobs are not that far away from our high school students. We need to give our kids credit. And that's, Schurz is a majority minority population. So it's not just Northwest Side. We can do this everywhere if we invest at the right time and give the kids the opportunity. They will come out and be the next entrepreneurs because their first job can be at Amazon or it can be at Facebook.
This is really ironic. I'm sitting here looking at the clock, and the main reason that I had originally wanted to have you on the show was to talk about the affordable housing stuff and these giant battles that you've been having with 5150 Northwest Highway and what's going on in the 41st Ward with the big building there. And we don't have enough time to really do justice to it because we've been yakking about all these other things, which are also important. But I want to talk a little bit about 45th Ward. I mean, at this moment, are you being challenged by anybody? Is anybody announced against you?
There's one who's announced, though I'm sure there'll be others. And again, until we get to the petition process and names are on the ballot, then I'll know who I'm running against. I'm running on the record of 8 years when I come back to the voters of saying, look, we need economic development, we need transparency, and we need accountability. I will hold up what I've done and the way I've done it. Am I perfect? No, but increased the economic opportunity in the ward. The number of businesses that have opened and expanded in the ward is exponential compared to 20 years before. The housing options, we see our single-family homes market is strong, turning over to young families who want to be in this neighborhood because of the transportation access, schools, parks. You know, and I've been transparent. I'm available to my constituents. My staff is professional. We deliver what we can under the authority we have. And my role on City Council has been to be vocal, support things that, whether it's the mayor's idea or a council member's idea, that are good for my constituents and good for the city, and be vocal when it's not. And if I'm not doing that, then they should vote me out. But I feel like if I tell that story, I feel like I earned a third term to continue the work.
It's important to say that among the many things that you've done, one of the most controversial is this aforementioned 5150 Northwest Highway. You want to build or wanted, I guess we have to put it in past tense now, but you wanted to build.
It's still on track.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. You want a building that is, how many units?
It was proposed at 100. We've revised it down in our last application to IDA to 75 units in response to some of the concerns from community about density.
And of course the thing is that these are units that are all subsidized housing.
Not all, it's mixed income. It's mixed income from CHA, a percentage of CHA, which are the lowest income, 30% AMI, to 60% AMI, meaning sliding scale of 1/3 of your income goes to rent, allows you to spend everything else on what you need, healthcare, education, and then a percentage of about 15 of the units or 25% of the units being market rate.
Market rate.
And why I think that's important, why I put this forward, because what we need to do is build density buildings like that where we're not concentrating poverty. We don't want to concentrate poverty in big buildings. We also don't want to concentrate poverty in relatively small buildings like a 75-unit building. Right. If you look at our neighborhoods, my block on the northwest side has, 70-year-old pensioners that are making $40,000, $50,000 a year, and households like mine that are in the six figures with two incomes. We already have mixed income neighborhoods. Right. What we need to do is allow for people to have access to neighborhood regardless of what their income is. And what we see is the success of bringing a Starbucks to a neighborhood creates gentrification. A landlord sees a Starbucks coming in and down the street, his rent goes up $100 the next day. Well, $100 to the person who's been living there who's on a fixed income is a deal breaker.
Yeah.
So this is what we need to protect against. We're going to have success on bringing businesses and opportunities. We also have to make sure that the housing market is accessible to everybody.
I believe this is the greatest debate of our time.
It is.
It goes around gentrification,
everywhere.
But it's like you build the 606, and that's great, and everybody loves it. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you find that hundreds of people have lost their homes, right, because of it.
Yeah.
You build a Starbucks, and at least half a dozen people are going to have to move out because of it. We need to increase, going back to the TIF discussion, we need to keep building and increasing the value of our city and of our real estate.
But as you do that, you displace. And we, when it happens to us, we're like, why aren't you building more affordable units?
Right.
If it hasn't happened to us yet, we tend to say, well, that's too bad, but you got to go find a way to make a few more dollars.
So the answer in the past has been, well, then let them just move somewhere else. Right?
Yeah, but to where?
And now that we've finally hit the wall where there just isn't any place else to move, you have to start thinking about, well, maybe we ought to build a building that helps to address some of this.
That gives and one of the big pieces of this building that doesn't get talked about is that it's got a preference for the disabled.
Right.
Less than 1% of the units in this city of Chicago, and think about this, millions of units here are accessible to disabled. They also tend to be the lowest income earners because of their disabilities, and we ostracize them to parts of the city where they can't get around.
Absolutely right.
So where the sidewalks are broken, where the rents are where they can afford, the sidewalks are broken so they can't get to transportation.
Yeah.
This is literally, you'd be able to see from this building the most robust transportation center on the northwest side. You can get to any suburb, any part of the city from that via bus, train, or metro.
Yeah.
If we
Within a
say
block
no
or so.
to that, then we're wrong.
If you can't have density there, if you
Where?
can't have a mix of housing there, then yeah, like I said.
Yeah, and
like
none
you
of
said,
this
show me a place
touches
where you can.
a single-family homeowner who can't see this building, is not going to have a big building next to him. In my policies, we don't touch the single-family home market.
Yeah.
That stays, and that's what we see. Those are getting invested in. Allow us to build around the transit center, and allow us to create. That will help create a robust economy of businesses that the homeowners want.
Yeah.
Everybody wins in this equation.
There's so much to talk about that we didn't even get to the affordable, the ARO, the ordinance.
That's a whole show on its
right,
own.
and how you actually wanted to put your northwest side into part of that, which is fascinating in and of itself. Maybe you'll come back again sometime.
Anytime.
All right, we'll continue this conversation because it is the conversation of our time in our city, and I'm just really glad that we were able to get you to the show. I really
Same here.
enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much. John Arena is an alderman in the city of Chicago. He's the alderman of 45th Ward, as you know, is from the conversation up around Jefferson Park and Portage Park, that area. And it's been a real pleasure having you here. We'll be back next week with another conversation about some of the same things, but you'll have to just tune in to find out what it is, because we don't know yet. We haven't quite figured it all out. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching Chicago Newsroom today. And remember that if you go to this address, you can watch all of our somewhere like 300 shows we've done right here on CAN TV, and some of them are really worth watching. A couple of them anyway. See you next week, all right? Thanks to CAN TV. Thanks to David Resnick for producing, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.